Resident Evil Requiem is one of the most dangerous kind of AAA gaming success stories because it doesn't look like the failure it actually is. It runs well, sounds great, it's polished, it's nostalgic, and that polish is exactly what hides the rot. The game doesn't fail loudly. It obscures lack of quality quietly. It rewrites, it retcons, it reframes, and if you don't stop to question it, it does feel fine. But the more you examine it, the more the foundation cracks. And once you see those cracks, you can't unsee them. I apologize in advance for what I'm about to do to you guys, because I've beaten Resident Evil Requiem twice now. Not once, but twice. I didn't speedrun it. I didn't skip cutscenes. I didn't go in looking for problems beyond the problems you would normally look for on a day one release of a video game. And I really did want to like this game because I love this franchise. It is my favorite franchise in all of gaming. And right now, this game is being praised almost universally. Technical masterpiece, return to form, celebration of legacy, game of the year contender. And that's disheartening. Not because it's cyberpunk at launch, this barely runs trash, but because it's actually worse than that. It's narratively irresponsible, it's canonically destabilizing, it's emotionally manipulative, and it's structurally reliable. And a franchise that used to thrive on risk. And that's why this matters. Now let's start fair. The RE engine is beautiful. The game is visually impressive on a technical level. Lighting, incredible. Environmental detail, top tier. Sound design, stellar. On AMD rigs, like mine, it runs brilliantly out the gate. Now, to be fair, I have seen reports of crashes and stuttering on NVIDIA hardware, so clearly optimization isn't universal. But on my end, smooth as butter, son. The voice acting, fantastic. Every actor is doing their job. That actually makes the writing problems even more frustrating because good performances are trying desperately to elevate weak characterization. Gameplay, when it actually lets you play, feels good. Gunplay is tight. Combat feedback is satisfying. Leon's action sections especially feel mechanically solid. And Grace's gameplay, conceptually at least, resembles classic Resident Evil. You're stuck in an isolated location, you backtrack, you search for items, you deal with claustrophobic environments, you experience fight or flight tension. On paper, that's classic survival horror. But that's the key word. On paper. Because execution is where this game collapses. Now, let's talk about the first 45 minutes. Guys, they're boring. Walking, cutscene. It isn't tension building. It's a walking simulator separated by cinematics. Go back to Resident Evil 1. You're thrown into danger almost immediately. You encounter your first zombie by the third room. Instant fight or flight. What about Resident Evil 2 and 3? You were surrounded by flames and hordes of infected out the gate. No time to even study the mechanics of the game. Resident Evil 4 and 5, you were fighting for survival within minutes. Classic Resident Evil understood something simple. Agency creates tension. Requiem opens like a prestige streaming drama that forgot, oh, it's supposed to be interactive. And before you can settle into Grace's horror tone, you switch to Leon. But then back again. Horror, action, like massive tonal inconsistency out the gate. You never sit and dread long enough for it to mature. The structure is fragmented, and that fragmentation never fully resolves. Let's start with Grace. Grace Ashcroft. This is where the emotional manipulation becomes obvious. Grace is an FBI analyst. That means field training, weapons training, psychological conditioning. Instead, she's written like a frightened civilian in a slapdash Hollywood horror flick. She trips, falls, mutters to herself, and whines constantly. She stutters through nearly every conversation, even when nothing horrifying is actually happening. She audibly panics during gameplay, and I'm not arguing she shouldn't be afraid. I'm arguing her portrayal contradicts her profession, which makes the fear feel artificial rather than organic. Here's the key issue. The developers are trying to make you feel afraid by telling you that she's afraid. That's not how horror works in games. Fear in an interactive medium comes from systems, resource and ammo scarcity, location-based uncertainty, player responsibility, mechanical tension, not scripted clumsiness. Taking control away from the player does not enhance the fear. It enhances annoyance. Because you're reminded you're not actually in control in an interactive medium, it breaks the immersion. All right, let's slow this down. Let's just think about the opening hours with Grace. The repeated tripping, the forced crawling sections, the heavy breathing layered constantly in your ear, the whispered, panicked dialogue. This isn't subtle horror design. It's theatrical horror design. It's the game saying, look, she's vulnerable. But vulnerability in classic Resident Evil came from mechanics. In Resident Evil 1, you're vulnerable because of the tank controls and limited ammo, camera angles obscuring threats. The game didn't tell you to be afraid. It let the mechanics create the fear. Grace's section often feels like the game doesn't trust the mechanics to carry tension, so it layers scripted weakness on top. And once you notice it, it becomes predictable, and predictability is exactly what kills horror. And then there's the puzzles. They're so easy, it's almost insulting. Like, why do they even include them at this point? They feel obligatory. Like someone said, Resident Evil needs puzzles, not because they challenge the player, not because they reward observation, not because they evolve mechanics, but because they need to check a box. It's a boardroom after a market research study saying, well, it isn't Resident Evil if there's no puzzles. Like, even though Grace's gameplay conceptually resembles classic Resident Evil, it fails in execution because you're so limited due to the hand-holding, being guided and protected. The game doesn't trust you to struggle. And somehow this is still better than when you play as Leon, because this is where the game actively becomes damaging. Like, from Resident Evil 2 to 4 to 6, and even the CGI films, Leon has been a consistent character. Snarky, quick-witted, capable, emotionally steady under pressure. He has faced global catastrophes and come out clean on the other side, resolute with an unwavering resolve. And now, suddenly, 28 years later, he's defined by survivor's guilt over Raccoon City? Dude, he was there for a day almost 3 decades ago. Since then, multiple global outbreaks, entire cities destroyed, governments infiltrated, friends lost. Nothing in canon suggests that Raccoon City psychologically crippled him. This isn't earned, it's forced, as if the writers needed emotional weight, so they rewrote Leon to fit the narrative. Your plot should always service the characters, not the other way around. Like, let's slow this down and examine the monster child scene, when Emily mutates into a horror beyond Grace's comprehension. Because this is the emotional thesis of the game. Leon encounters the now mutated child. Music swells, lighting tightens, Leon goes for the kill while Grace desperately pleads for him not to do it, only for the end of the game to reveal Leon intentionally didn't hit any vital organs, meaning the newly discovered cure can now be used on her. The game wants moral tension, but let's actually break this down. Leon has spent decades fighting bioweapons. He has seen infected civilians, he has seen irreversible mutation, and he has seen hesitation cost lives. He doesn't know a cure exists. There is zero narrative justification for him to assume reversal is possible. He is literally gambling lives on sentimentality, and then the script rewards him and Grace for it. Like, a cure exists, the child is saved, he was right not to shoot to kill. Again, that's not earned, that's engineered. Imagine this instead. Let's stay in that moment a little longer. Picture this. Leon walks in the room. He sees what used to be a child. You recognize instantly what the scene's trying to do. The framing lingers, the music swells in that this is morally important kind of way. Leon lowers his weapon slightly. The game wants you to feel the weight. But what's actually happening mechanically? Well, nothing changes. The threat's still lethal. The stakes are still life or death. The game has decided this is a redemption beat. So here's the deeper problem. Resident Evil used to be about irreversible consequence. When someone's infected, that's it. That's tragedy. That's horror. Requiem flirts with that weight, but then immediately softens it. Well, the cure exists. Child survives. Grace adopts him. Roll credits. That's not horror. That's emotional reassurance. Imagine if the cure failed. Imagine if Leon's hesitation led to collateral damage. Imagine if Grace had to wrestle with the reality that not everyone can be saved. That would have been bold. That would have respected the franchise's legacy of loss. Instead, this game chooses comfort. Comfort is the antithesis to horror. Didn't like that framing? What about this option? Leon hesitates, but pulls the trigger anyway, killing Emily. Grace is forced to confront the world of BOWs has consequences. That's character growth. Instead, the game protects them both. Like, the story needs a safe ending, so it bends Leon to achieve it. It wants emotional weight without moral cost. There was a time when Resident Evil understood cost. Requiem avoids it. So far, this is all without even acknowledging the plot holes. Alright, Grace gets bitten early in the game. No infection. We're told repeatedly she's special. Big reveal? She's not special, just normal. So what was the bite? If she's immune, that contradicts the reveal. If it was luck, that's some narrative convenience. What about Elpis? It's a mind control virus. No wait, it's a cure. Zeno then injects himself. Why? If it controls minds, why would he use it on himself? If he doesn't know what it does, why inject it at all? Like, this isn't complex plotting. It's tension for the sake of tension followed by twist reversal. It doesn't survive any level of scrutiny. And then it uses nostalgia as a structural crutch. This is all before we get into the nostalgia baiting that really hampers the game's narrative. Oh, you rescue a child, like in Resident Evil 2. Mansion, to cave, to courtyard, to lab. That's Resident Evil 1. Revisit Raccoon City and key locations from Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. So fans go, I recognize that! And then they clap like seals. Leon is infected, like Resident Evil 4. Zeno, mirroring Wesker in both visual design and moveset. That's Resident Evil 5. Like, I get it. Recognition creates dopamine. But recognition isn't innovation. Strip away the references. What systems evolve? Very little. When Resident Evil 4 was released, it reinvented third-person combat. When Resident Evil 7 released, it committed fully to perspective reinvention. I get it, for better or worse. A lot of folks don't like Resident Evil 7, but at least it was doing something new. Requiem hedges. Half horror, half action, half nostalgia, half new conspiracy. It never plants a flag. And if the nostalgia bait wasn't enough, the retcons make everything infinitely worse. Raccoon City wasn't wiped off the map. It was only partially destroyed. Okay, let's walk through that logically. If it physically exists, government agencies would investigate the ruins, intelligence operations would examine the epicenter of the most infamous outbreak in history, especially after subsequent global bioterror events. You're telling me that leading up to the events, or even after the events of Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, or Chris and Jill's assault on Umbrella's Russian base of operations in 2003, no one from our core cast thought to go back and reevaluate the original outbreak site? There's been a cure under the city for 28 goddamn years, and no one found it? This doesn't deepen lore. That's not expansion. That's retroactive incompetence. It's not just in-universe retconning that's the issue here, because if we zoom out further, Raccoon City being partially intact doesn't just create a plot hole, it rewrites the emotional symbolism of the original trilogy. Raccoon City being wiped off the map meant something. It meant the government was willing to erase a city to contain bioterror. It meant consequence. It meant escalation. When you say it was only partially destroyed, you dilute that symbolism. Now it's not a catastrophic point of no return. It's just another location that might still have secrets under it. Lessened even further by the retcon that the US government didn't even really make the call themselves. They were manipulated by a new evil crime syndicate called the Connections. Once you introduce the idea that there's hidden labs under old disaster sites or hidden factions no one knew about over 30 years, you open Pandora's box. Now every future outbreak can be solved by maybe there's another lab, or maybe they aren't the true final boss. That's not tightening stakes, that's loosening them. And when stakes loosen, tension collapses. The retcons don't just stop with the original trilogy either. Oswald Lee Spencer. We're shown flashbacks via an interview with Alyssa Ashcroft implying regret. Except in Resident Evil 5, he's not redeemed at all. Like, timeline-wise, this regret scene should be happening before the events of Resident Evil 5. So he both regretted everything and he didn't? Way to stick to your own canon source material, Capcom. Umbrella aren't even the real villains now. It was the Connections. Umbrella was just a cog in the wheel. So Chris and Jill's takedown of Umbrella meant nothing. Scale is increased, but personal stakes are absolutely minimized. Wesker himself doesn't even escape this mess of retcons and character-defining incompetence, and that's all due to Victor Gideon. Okay, we're supposed to believe this no-name Umbrella researcher uncovered secrets that Wesker never did. Wesker, the man who infiltrated governments, manipulated global networks, and nearly ended the world. And Gideon operating one city over from Raccoon City's ruins, running a healthcare facility. Like, we're told he was supposed to testify in the Umbrella trials, but was never found. Dude is owning and operating a publicly facing business. This guy outplayed Wesker, outsmarted intelligence agencies. That is not intrigue. This is fan fiction logic. Let's compare the two for just a moment. Wesker, double agent, bioweapon strategist, corporate manipulator, nearly ended humanity. Gideon runs a medical clinic one city over and missed a court date. The only way this plot works is if everyone else was incompetent for nearly 3 decades. That is canon eating itself. And I can already hear the defenses. You just don't like change. No, I respect bold pivots. Change isn't the problem. Contradiction is. You're overthinking it, my dude. This is the 11th mainline entry in a 30-year franchise. Continuity matters. If canon doesn't matter, why even have a shared universe? It's character development. Stop right there. Development requires setup. There was no long-term setup for Leon's psychological collapse. It appears when the plot needs it. That's just the script doing backflips. Resident Evil used to reinvent itself. Resident Evil defined survival horror. Hell, you could argue created the genre. Resident Evil 4 redefined third-person action. Resident Evil 7 reinvented perspective. Requiem just simply maintains. It references, it retcons, it retrofits emotional weight. If this were a new IP, it'd be a flawed 6 out of 10. But as the 11th mainline Resident Evil, it destabilizes canon. It weakens states. It relies on nostalgia to mask inherent structural problems. It rewrites characters to manufacture emotion. That's not evolution, it's all the hallmarks of creative exhaustion on full display. And the real bitch of the bunch? This didn't even start with Resident Evil Requiem. If anything, Requiem is actually just the biggest victim here, because this is bigger than one game. This is a noticeable shift in modern AAA storytelling. Cinematic framing over systemic tension, emotional signaling over earned payoff, retcons over long-term planning, nostalgia over reinvention. Requiem embodies that shift. It wants to feel important. It wants to feel emotional. It wants to feel like legacy. But feeling like legacy and building legacy are two different things. Legacy is built through risk, through permanent consequence, through bold and creative swings. Requiem doesn't even swing. It rearranges the past and calls it growth while never taking any risks. That's why it rings hollow, not because it's incompetent, because it's safe. Resident Evil is never at its best when it was safe, and this is what really bothers me. If the game had just been mediocre, like Resident Evil 6, I wouldn't even care this much. Mediocre entries fade. They sit quietly in the catalog. But Requiem is being celebrated. And that celebration sends a message. It tells publishers, polish is enough, nostalgia is enough, emotional signaling is enough. You don't need airtight writing. You don't need long-term continuity discipline. You don't need to respect legacy characterization. Just make it look good, make it sound dramatic, and bring back familiar names. The people will fill in the rest. That's not growth, that's brand maintenance. Resident Evil used to lead this industry, and now it just feels like it's preserving itself. Preservation is what you do when you're afraid to take risk. The scariest thing about Requiem isn't anything even in the game, it's what it represents. A franchise that once reinvented itself, now rearranging old furniture. A series built on consequence, now insulating itself from loss. A universe defined by catastrophe, now cushioning every blow. That's why it bothers me. Because if this direction continues, the stakes will just keep shrinking, the retcons will just keep stacking, the emotional beats will just keep softening. Eventually nothing will matter, not because the game's broken, because they're benign. The safety is the quiet death of horror. That's the real problem. That's why Resident Evil Requiem is trash.
Hasta luego.